Tupac had no business calling himself a mob Pyru, which was Suge Knight's neighborhood. Suge Knight created a record label, Death Row, but he really amped it up by making his heads of security, all his main guys were real killers. Everybody involved in these stories are dead, not because of this rap stuff, but because of the street life that they're from.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the sins of the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. The death of rap icon Tupac Shakur has been the stuff of books, films, and even song. But now a Nevada grand jury has charged a 60-year-old former gang leader with the cold case killing. Duane Keffe D Davis was one of the 4 original suspects for the Las Vegas shooting in 1996, which came about after hostilities between the Bloods and the Crips street gangs spilled over and celebrities took sides. Today, I'm talking to Douglas Century, who covered the hip-hop scene as a journalist for the New York Times during the 1990s, and who last year co-authored Split Decision with rapper and former LA gangster Ice-T. He tells me about the origins of Tupac Shakur's untimely death and the suspect who has talked himself into a courtroom. This is Crime World, a podcast from SundayWorld.com. So we know very little really about this whole case here in Ireland, but we do know very much the names of the Bloods and the Crips, and really it sort of centres on this 2 gangs. And I think they each drew some of these rappers to each side. Is that the case?
Oh, yeah, and it's a lot more complicated than 2 gangs. There are neighborhoods of Los Angeles and Compton, which is a suburb, where these gangs, it's multi-generational now. You've got these, what they call OGs. Everybody uses that term OG. It just means the original generation. So some of these guys, the man that was arrested is 60, but he's not even, there's guys who we're talking about probably a 5th generation, grandfathers, and you're born to these neighborhoods. Many of the worst wars are Crip sets, they call them sets, different like rolling 60s against A-Tray gangsters. In this case, you have the mob Pyrus, which is Suge Knight. He grew up in that neighborhood against the South Side Crips of Compton. What makes it complicated is that even within the alliance of Crips, they'll go to war with each other, and the Bloods will go to war with each other. But their umbrella, you've seen it in the movies, the Bloods wear red and the Crips wear blue. And every hat, every baseball cap, if it says S for Seattle Mariners, that means it's the rolling 60s. P for a different baseball team from Philadelphia is the Pyrus. So it's so deeply coded, and it's a culture that is entrenched now. And Tupac had no business playing with those kind of guys. That's the real, you want to cut to the chase of it. A guy from a well-educated young man coming from an acting and performing background is hanging out with hardened criminals who have no other lane in life other than crime.
So these gangs, and they go back to the 1970s, Doug, the Crips and one of them came first, and then the other kind of was set up in order to give protection from whichever one came first.
Quick history. The Crips was a guy named Raymond Washington, another guy named Tookie Williams. Raymond Washington went to a high school where they wore blue. And it started off really as youth gangs, like you have in every city in Europe and Ireland. Fighting, mostly fist fighting. And then some of these guys, you see the original generation, they really prided themselves on their, a lot of these guys had been to prison. So you've seen how the physiques, they were bodybuilder guys, and they used to love to have fist fights. And then the Crips became known. There's different theories of why they're called Crips, but it was actually almost the Black Panther era, like late 60s. And they really, I think they felt it's been proven that the LAPD is pretty racist. And then there never really was a gang called the Bloods. There were all sorts of, one was called the Harvard Brims. The one down in Compton is called Pyrus, Priu. Sometimes they're just named, there's one called the Fruit Top Bloods. They are actually just from a neighborhood where all the streets have fruit names or treetop. So fruit town and treetop. I'm sorry. So you know the Crips existed first, and then the Bloods. Any gang that wasn't a Crip became a Blood alliance to defend themselves. And there's way more. I think it's something like 5-1 Blood Crips to Bloods. But it's become this fashion thing where you hear now Cardi B says she's a Blood, and all these rappers. They're not. They didn't grow up in these intergenerational families where your grandfather, your uncles, and all were from this neighborhood tribalism, and they really are willing to kill for the neighborhood.
So going back to Tupac, he was originally from Harlem, yeah? So he had, not only did he not have anything to do with it, but he was from the other side of the continent.
Anybody that really wants to understand who he is, there's a YouTube video of him at age 17 in high school, the most with these doe-like eyes, almost somebody said almost effeminate. He wasn't effeminate, but he looked so sensitive and he was so well spoken, and he was a went to high school for performing arts. Actually got his start in the Bay Area in San Francisco as a part of the digital underground, but he had no business. He was not from that world. Somebody was explaining this in one of these YouTube videos that have been going viral. These guys, these gangbangers start gangbanging when they're 10, 11, 12. When you're 20 years old, like he was, you're not really part of the gang. You're just playing a role.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he has a lot to answer for. I mean, rest in peace. It's 27 years since his death. He was not from that world. He allied himself with Suge Knight for various reasons I can explain. Suge Knight even wasn't a gangster himself. He was a big American football player. But you're playing with fire. You're playing with these guys that, I did a couple books with Ice-T, and he's from that world. And Ice-T said to me, Doug, these are guys that'll never make a record. These guys will never have a TV appearance or anything. All they have is home invasions, drug dealing, carjackings, jewelry heists. It's a different world, and they live and die by it. And this entire stupid thing we can get into was all over a chain snatching.
But Doug, how do they mix from those two worlds? Did they then, when Tupac Shakur was murdered, and how do they now? Like, you see these celebrities, these hip hop celebrities, they're very wealthy, they're surrounded with security, they're celebrities in the same way as anyone else. So, how did they end up befriending guys who are coming from these multi generational criminal families, from these hoods, from these areas you probably wouldn't stray into?
Yeah, well, a lot of the Los Angeles based, I mean, we're talking really about Los Angeles based gangs. Now the Bloods and the Crips have spread. So someone like Cardi B, who is from the Bronx, will say, I mean, we do now have in New York City Bloods. It's almost like a fashion statement. One of the old G's, a guy named Big U, said, I think you can just go out and buy a bandana. Like there used to be an initiation process, and so they're not really in the gangs. It's a fashion thing now. Going back to the rappers you've heard of, like Snoop Dogg, and they came from those neighborhoods. They grew up in those neighborhoods and were involved in crime. So their friends and many of the people that they were around, they saw this as a way when the rap music came along to kind of get out of the gang life. Tupac is almost reverse engineering it, trying to get himself into it, which is what makes it kind of sad. It's not a world he really understood. But there are many rappers. I mean, I could drop the names, but like Dub C and there's all the Be Real, all these guys from Los Angeles. It's where you're born. So I always say this in the mafia in New York City. You'll say, "Who are you with?" Like, who's your crew? Who you're with? Los Angeles, the challenge is where you from, meaning what's your neighborhood, and then if you're a gangbanger, you say I'm 60s or I'm there's all these different names, and you throw up a sign, and that's war. And there's like Ice-T said to me, gangbangers are only looking to go to war with the other gangbangers. So if you're from the neighborhood and you're kind of affiliated with it, not to cross into another neighborhood. Even schoolgirls will be told, Daddy, I can't wear blue. I live in a blood neighborhood." So it affects everybody. There's mothers who've got sons and grandsons, so they're co-opted into it. Like, the drugs will be stashed in their houses, but it's the entire neighborhood. Tupac had no business calling himself a mob Pyru, which was Suge Knight's neighborhood. Suge Knight created a record label, Death Row, which went to hell, obviously, but fell all apart. But he really amped it up by making his heads of security, all his main guys were real killers. I mean, he had a couple
Right.
guys. He had a guy, the guy that is most likely to have killed Biggie Smalls was Suge's main hitman, a guy named Poochie. And you can tell you how violent this world is. Almost everybody involved in these stories are dead, not because of this rap stuff, but because of the street life that they're from. So you're born into it. You don't want to go pretending like you're from that world.
And was Suge Knight, was he as famous or more famous, or was Tupac, and was Suge Knight a kind of an older person in this world for Tupac? I mean, I'm trying to imagine this guy coming from drama school and sort of almost, gunthering into this world where he just doesn't understand or has no connections. Is it an older guy that he's looking up to that sort of draws him into it?
Not that much older, because Suge Knight's around my age, 58. He's doing time for manslaughter now. These guys are all the rappers are about 50. A guy like Ice-T would be older. He was 13, Ice-T 65. He'd be 13 years older than. And Ice-T warned Tupac. He said this several times in interviews, and to me, he was very good friends with Tupac, and he warned him, you're not understanding who you're playing with here. But the genesis of it all was, to get back into the 90s, Tupac was charged with sexual assault and rape. It was a very conflicting stories, but he did go to a very bad prison. So even though he's not a street guy, he went to Clinton Dannemora, which is where, like, it's near the Canadian, they call it Siberia because it's so far up from New York City that it's by the Canadian border. And Suge Knight bonded him out at $1.4 million. So this whole thing that happened in Las Vegas and all that, he's technically still doing time for this sexual assault, but he's out on bond for an appeal. And Suge Knight gave him the money. It's almost like make your deal with the devil. And suddenly, when Tupac comes out, now he's a full-fledged blood. All his records he's shouting out mob Pyru. There's theories, like, did he really believe it? Was he doing it just? I mean, his rivalry with Biggie Smalls. Biggie Smalls said to him, dude, you're playing that role Bishop from the movie, Juice. I mean, he played a gangster in a really good early hip hop movie. Tupac's a great actor. He was a really gifted guy. And when I see it, I think he's just playing a role. He's just posing.
And Doug, how was this playing out? Because it was a different time to nowadays. There wasn't social media. They weren't able to call one another out on their Instagram accounts. They didn't exist. So how was all this sort of him calling people out and, saying he was part of the Bloods, and was that happening through media, or was it just happening on the street level as well?
Oh, no, it was records. And so infamously, so Tupac got shot in Manhattan in a recording studio, and he thought Biggie Small set him up. Now, Puffy, who's not a hero of this story, he's another villain, released a song called "Who Shot Ya?" It's a very famous song by Biggie Smalls. People say it didn't really refer to Tupac, who had been shot and lost his testicle, and this was his first shooting. But Tupac took that as, like, you're making fun of me, and he came back with this record that's just infamous called "Hit 'Em Up." And the very first line is, "I effed your wife, you fat F," And it, like, Ice-T said to me when he came to Ice-T's house and played this, and Ice-T said, "Whoa." And I actually was running around with some hip hop guys in New York at this time, and I heard an early version of it before it was released. And a guy that I was with, I don't want to curse on your show, from a guy from Brooklyn, he said, MFers are going to start dying behind this. Like, this had be this level of, there was always diss records in hip hop, but this started to be like, yeah, what does Tupac says? I'll kill all of you. Like, you're mad because our staff got guns in their MF and waists. It's like it. So, and then also in videos. So remember, music videos were MTV, and you had MTV Europe, right? It was back and forth, and then there were radio DJs played a big role, and also remember the days of print. You and I are journalists. Vibe magazine, there were articles that specifically ramped this up into, it was never East Coast versus West Coast. It was two record labels, Bad Boy, which was Puff Daddy and his artist, Biggie Smalls, and Little Kim, et cetera, and Death Row, which at that time had the greatest producer, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, their leading artist, but NWA. So it was really the egos of these two megalomaniacs, Suge Knight and Puff Daddy, and they're, you know, in this arrest we can talk about. Puff Daddy is alleged to have put bounties on Suge Knight's life, on Tupac's life. So it to me, a guy like Puff Daddy, his dad was in the streets and his dad got murdered, but Puff Daddy associated with some real New York gangsters. Suge Knight, again, they call him Sugar Bear, big guy. I don't know if you count in stone or pounds. He's a 300-pound man. Like, he was a football player, but he was a goon. He wasn't really like part of the gang world either. So it's a whole bunch of people playing these roles and getting mixed up with, I mean, what do you call them over there? Villains. Uh, you know what? I thought about this as an analogy. I don't know how big Top Boy is in Ireland. I love this
Yeah.
show, Top Boy. Well, those actors, Ashley and Kane, okay, they play it very convincingly. There probably are real street wars going on in those Hackney. Now imagine them not filming, going to a casino or a boxing match with those guys, and as Tupac did, stomping out a rival from another crew. You're insane. You're an actor playing as if you're, but you're not part of that street level. And that's really what Tupac did. He was involved in the beating and stomping of a rival gang member, and the shooting was
Retaliation for that.
yeah, you don't
Yeah.
do that. You don't stomp. The guy that's arrested is the OG. So he looks like a he looks like he's having a hard time now. His teeth are all messed up. But I have seen pictures. 27 years ago, he was what's the shot caller, meaning he's the boss of that crew of Southside Crips, and it was his nephew at the casino. If you've seen the videos, it's just they're stomping the crap out of him, and it was all over a chain snatching because Puffy had said, I remember these giant medallions people had, death row. Um, I think the allegation was, if anybody can snatch those death row chains, I'll pay $15,000, which wasn't killing them, but it was still, well, in the streets, I'm sure it's the same in Dublin and anywhere gangsters wear flashy jewelry. You snatch a chain, the consequences you might get stabbed or shot.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
really high level of disrespect. And that's what's crazy is Tupac has everything to live for. I don't know if it was a death wish. You get so caught up in playing this gangster life that you think you're really one of them, but he had no business.
And behind it all, was there business people making money out of it? Was there people encouraging this sort of, it's a feud really, what's happening, a tit for tat insults. They're doing it through their music, through their videos. And was there people kind of like, did people navel gaze after Tupac Shakur was killed? Did people sit back and think there was a lot of people being irresponsible here and pushing this?
There was a huge, what's the word? I mean, it sold records, it sold magazines. I mean, when there was a cover of Vibe magazine with Suge Knight and Dr. Dre and Snoop. And I mean, I remember rushing out to buy it. You had to see, what are they going to say? So people were profiting. And then the irony was, Biggie Smalls, Notorious B.I.G., only really released one record while he was alive. He was murdered while he was in Los Angeles to promote his second album. But there are many posthumous albums. I've got one like just sitting there saying, okay, this one was released life after death. It's there was millions to be made. So some conspiracy theorists have said, you know what? I bet Puffy set up Biggie to get killed because you could make more money off him. There's a theory that Tupac was unhappy with Suge Knight and was trying to leave the label, so Suge Knight set up the hit so that wow, I've got his catalog. And I mean, but the crazy thing is that makes no sense because Suge Knight was shot in the same incident in the head. So if you set up a hit on your artist, you don't want to be in the driver's seat getting shot in the head. But yeah, I mean, after it happened, there was a huge sense of two of the most talented guys. These are guys in their early 20s, 23, 24, were killed. Was it worth it? Was it worth it to ramp up this level of animosity, tribalism? It really spread beyond the two camps to other, well-known hip hop groups. And a lot of people, a lot of executives made a lot of money off it. Those records flew off the shelves because it was, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, in the aftermath, there was a number of movies, documentaries made all around it. So it was a very significant time in hip hop, undoubtedly. I suppose when
I could just say one thing. Uh, Now what they call hip hop, the Drakes and there's a lot of, or they call drill rap. This is all the stuff. It's about drug dealing. It's sort of like, well, you have grime over there, right? Grime had its era in London, but so for me, and even young people who were born in 2002 will be, oh man, I miss the 90s hip hop. I'm like, you weren't born. I mean, I was there in New York going to these shows, the Wu-Tang Clan. So everybody views, the other thing that makes this so significant is everybody that's a real hip hop head looks at this period of the mid 90s as being the golden era. You had some of the best records, the production. I mean, people still, if you're at a party and people start playing those Dr. Dre records or Biggie's records, Biggie is still often considered one of the greatest of all time. And Puffy's this guy. He had a huge hit called "I'll Be Missing You," which was like this whole maudlin, mourning for his lost artist. So it got to the point almost where people were saying, what's the word? It's almost cheesy to profit off grief, to make these millions off of the deaths and the mothers. I mean, both of them are now deceased. Vela Wallace and Afina Shakur. The mothers were the most tragic people in these stories because they lost their sons, and there were lawsuits claiming that the police departments of both the cities, Los Angeles and Las Vegas. Las Vegas is the one we're currently talking about, really botched these investigations. I mean, 27 years later, you're finally making an arrest, and they've known all along who the guys were.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So all along was their family in the background, calling for these people to be brought in? Were they kind of on anniversaries? Were they coming out, demanding that the investigation be relaunched? Or
there were huge.
How are we?
Notorious B.I.G. Biggie's mother sued the city of Los Angeles for $500 million. Some of these cases, I don't think there were many settlements. It was very hard to prove because nobody would cooperate. I mean, Suge Knight was there and was shot in the head, and he has refused to talk to the police. Everybody knew very quickly that the shooter, or of the one we're talking about now, the nephew of the man that was arrested, a guy named Orlando Anderson, Baby Lane. He's the guy that got stomped out. He took credit for it, that he killed Tupac. And the Southside Crips, which is a bordering neighborhood in Compton to the Bob Pyru's, they were known to be celebrating that they'd killed Tupac. But this guy was killed just a couple years later. Like, so dead men tell no tales. So there's only two people alive who know what really happened, because there were four guys in the car with this man, Duane Keffe D Davis. The three other Crips are all dead. Suge Knight was with Tupac. He's dead. So Suge Knight won't talk, and he's away doing time. And Keffe D's the last man standing. And he's kind of what they say. Do they use the term dry snitching over there? He's admitted that he's in the car and had the gun, but he's waffled on who the shooter was. First, he said it was his nephew, and then there was another massive guy named Dre. Like, I couldn't believe this. 6'7", 400-pound guy who might have been the shooter. They're all dead.
And is it clinically ratting if everyone is dead, I wonder? Does it have that same sort of chilling effect if somebody...
Because you're admitting something and you're putting it on a dead guy. So that's not quite a snitch. But the problem is, dead men tell no tales. It's a kind of smart gangster. Mafia guys have been doing this. I'm sure Irish gangsters. You go in, oh, we know you were involved. Yeah, I was there. But Johnny did the shooting. Oh, Johnny's dead. Well, Johnny did a bunch of other murders also. So, gangsters have been doing this forever, putting the murder, halfway cooperating and saying, yeah, I know a bit about it. And that's what happened with this Keffe. I don't know if you guys understand the American slang. His middle name is Keith, T-H, but the way you would pronounce it is F. So they spell it Keffe, K-E-F-F-E. I mean,
and D for Davis.
Yeah, David. Yeah. And it's actually funny when you hear some of the gangster names, they don't sound rough and tough, like Sugar Bear.
No, they certainly don't.
Poochie or Baby Lane, but they're killers. I mean, these.
Funny enough, myself and Niall, my co-host, were talking about recently about the gangster names, and funny enough, the nicknames rather, the ones we give to a lot of the gangsters are quite kind, you know? We're actually quite complimentary to them when we give, but the ones from the street are really mean. I mean, anybody who has any kind of like a physical disability or anything that, you know, isn't, there's, anyway, there's all sorts of names that would come across as being very mean and very NPC.
But you're saying in Ireland, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. They usually focus in on a weakness. There's the Mexicans that we spoke of, like Chapo's main secretary had a huge nose, so his name was Nariz, nose. Like whatever your defect is,
whatever.
And I mean, Chapo's name is Shorty. That's not actually a compliment. Chapo literally is Shorty. But
it's usually also some sort of a problem that you can't do anything about cosmetically, like it's, you know, short legs or these
yeah, I think that but it shows you kind of the survival of the fittest of the gangster world, because they'll pick the hardest, the thing that you would make you the most defensive, and you've got to show how tough you are. Usually, I bet most of those guys had to fight to prove that, yeah, call me Big Nose and I'll beat the crap out of you or whatever. The guy that killed, I mean, it's so funny. The guy that killed, it's almost certainly killed Biggie Smalls, Poochie, which again sounds like pooch in our slang means a dog.
Yeah,
right? Poochie was about 5'4", tiny little guy, but just a ruthless killer. And the thing about these guys, they don't. One point I want to make that Ice-T, and I hate to keep dropping the name, but we wrote a book.
Yeah, exactly. So you know a lot about it.
Well, and he told me this. He said, Doug, you know what? Even when we made it out, and we're entertainers, we're hanging out in that world, there's a jealousy factor. I mean, they may be proud that you're from the neighborhood, but they also see that you made all this money, and that's why a very well-known guy from the Rolling 60s, Nipsey Hussle, he was murdered by a fellow Crip, and he was doing the thing that they always say African-American gangbangers and entertainers need to do, is put money back in the community. So, and don't move up to Beverly Hills and all. So Nipsey Hussle had his store at Marathon right back in the neighborhood. So, but you're back in that neighborhood, and there's people who are going to be jealous that you made success. So that's the other thing. Tupac thought, you know, you can see the swagger in this. Anybody can find these videos on YouTube when they stomp this guy. It's Tupac leading the charges, and he's swaggering off. Like, I'm like, I can get it. You feel like you're a powerful guy. You got these big brutes behind you. They know you're not really the gangbanger. You know, when it would come down to it, he was almost like their mascot. I think, like a kind of trophy. You know,
he walked his way into that world. So is Keffe D, despite the fact that he sort of confessed to the cops back in 2009, was he a bit as surprised as maybe the rest of us are that he's now going to be?
Well, it's, you know, the hip hop world is kind of laughing about it, or just even I guess the social media, because he's admitted this years ago. It's been years that he did a book. He did some interviews as a well-known DJ Vlad. These interviews were done 4 or 5 years ago. What happened, and maybe you can explain this to me, do they have what's known as proffer agreements in Irish law, where you can come in, he came in under a proffer agreement over a PCP, a drug case, and they said, we will give you immunity, we will not put you in jail. It's usually called Queen for a day. It's a 1 day, tell us what you know, we will not, you will not, it's self-incrimination, essentially. You will not be charged. So he had a proffer agreement where he thought, okay, it covered it, but it was just for this one aspect of a case. I don't know if they have that in Irish law.
Never heard of that now.
Okay, so it's a proffer agreement. So this is what happened, and this is where a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. He comes in, he has a PCP case against him, drug dealing. They say, tell us what you know about and he says, I was in the car, I had the gun. At that point, he said, I believe he said my nephew shot him, and no, can't be prosecuted. But then the problem was, that's supposed to be a kind of sealed 1 day thing. You're giving information to help them. Then he goes and starts doing all these interviews and writing books, and it's not covered under a proffer agreement. Now you're really confessing. I mean, the law in Ireland must be the same. If you are in a vehicle in a drive-by shooting and someone's killed, you're culpable for murder. So I mean, you're an accomplice, unless you're a hostage in the back seat or something, you know. But he admitted he had the gun and passed it. So, I mean, yeah, he must have misunderstood the Queen for a day.
The assignment.
And then, I mean, the other thing too is that the internet has gone crazy with mafia guys, ex hitmen, Michael Francesi and Sammy the Bull, but also all these LA gangbangers doing these YouTube channels. And it's like war stories. People can't get enough of it. But you're supposed to, there is one crime that there's no statute of limitations on: homicide. I mean, you want to talk about your drug dealing days, or we were jewel thieves. Okay, that was 20 years ago. They can't charge me. You start talking about you're out involved in a murder publicly. Um, and then what happened was, a few weeks ago in July, I was actually away in Israel. They raided not his house, his wife, Keffe D's wife's house. Apparently, they were looking for incriminating evidence. I don't know. He may have saved souvenirs, bullets from the gun. They never recovered the gun or the car. It was a Cadillac. Um, who knows what they may have found in the house?
So essentially, Keffe D has talked his way into, he's interviewed his way basically
Yes.
into trouble when he kind of would have walked away and got away with this. Is he sort of like, okay, he's 60. I have to say, he's looking quite well for a guy who's been in that scene for so long, and he's managed to survive it where many others haven't. Is he kind of retired, and how does that look like?
I don't know if you ever retire completely from, like, they'll say, are you active? Is he
Yeah.
still an active, like, what the LA slang is, are you a hitter? So his nephews were like, these guys were hitters, meaning assassins. Gang banging is more than just throwing up signs. It's you're at war with the enemy. As I recall, he said he was dying of cancer when he first came out and said, I'll do some interviews. He was dying of cancer. Who knows? I mean, there's different kinds of cancer. You might have had a little, basal cell carcinoma removed from your nose and you're fine. But at the time, I think he must have been told, you've got cancer. So he thought, okay, I'll tell my tale. Well, he survived. He doesn't have cancer now, it doesn't seem. And he's talked yes, everybody's laughing about it. Like, this idiot talked, sorry, I say that, this idiot talked his way into a homicide arrest. Now, what really people want to know is can he give up Puff Daddy? Because he has previously said, and now there's a big name, that Diddy offered $1 million for the deaths. I don't know if many people believe that. $1 million for the deaths of both Tupac and Suge Knight. Interesting, though, behind the scenes, a couple of these guys from the Southside Crips, including him, have said, no, initially Puffy didn't pay us. He had a war so he'd go to LA and there'd be all these bloods with Suge Knight. So somebody said, this is the oldest trick in the book, Real Hustler. He'd give them all these Southside Crips like tickets to the show, free backstage. So he got 50 Crips with him. And all they really got, he didn't get money. They just came to the show. But nobody's going to start problems with them, with their rival enemies. But yeah, Puffy definitely
he could have something to worry about.
It's very tough to see how the police could charge him, because from what I've heard, there was always a buffer. Somebody claims there was $1 million check at some point. The buffer who introduced Puffy to the Crips, this gets a bit murky, a guy named Vaughn, and he has another street name, and he was a big gangster and club owner. You can see pictures of Stevie Wonder and Mike Tyson. This is from Harlem. He's apparently he was a big, much older guy, a drug dealer who was doing business with the Southside Crips, and Puff Daddy calls him his uncle. Well, and he's deceased now too. So he would have been the go-between. So a lot of the people that could, if Puff Daddy were in any way culpable, I don't even think Keffe D's confession could put him
would be enough.
But that would be a catch.
Yeah. And do you know what it will also be? I mean, undoubtedly, whatever else it'll be, it will be somebody's retirement pot, won't it? Some detective there behind the scenes who's working away and who's going to ultimately solve the murder of Tupac Shakur from 1996.
Well, there have been a few of them retired LAPD and selling books. Some of their theories have been just crazy. Like, this is the irony of it all. There is, because Tupac Shakur is, he had a different birth name. He came from his parents were part of the Black Panther Party. There's all these theories, that he's still alive. There's theories that the FBI was involved. It was a government conspiracy, because in some of his records, he's really like speaking out against how racist the US government is. But what it comes down to is a really, people don't want to hear. It's a tawdry street level chain snatching at a mall, which resulted in a beatdown in a casino at a Mike Tyson fight, which then resulted. Suge Knight owned a nightclub, 662, which is the telephone keypad for mob. That's what all that meant. And they're on the way to 662, and the Southside Crips are there. They see an opportunity. This Baby Lane's shoulder was still like out of what do you call it when you dislocate your shoulder?
Yeah.
And they just saw an opportunity to shot him. So people don't want to hear it was as simple as that these two great artists could have been killed over something as, I don't know, menial and trivial that happens every day in the streets, day in the streets of Los Angeles, in the rougher areas of Dublin, or certainly in the East End of London.
And no doubt, if Tupac had have lived to look back on his younger self, he probably would have seen how taken up with all this stupidity he was. Had he matured and grown up and grown out of it all, he would have looked back probably and thought, I should never have been there.
I'm sure that, because if you Snoop Dogg now, he's hanging out with Martha Stewart and he's got his weed, and I mean you could tell how bad Death Row was if you look at all their artists. Dr. Dre went off to be a billionaire with his Beats by Dre. All of the main guys who were with Suge Knight have turned against him. I mean, Snoop Dogg did some really diss records talking about what a horrible guy Suge Knight was. So I'm sure Tupac would have, now being in his 50s, like looked back and said, wow, I was playing a role, and he really had a lot. He's really beloved, but I don't think he's as great a rapper in terms of the cadences, these things that people judge the flow, the metaphors. I don't think he's as great a rapper as Biggie, but he had this incredible charisma, and women loved him, like, because he really emoted. He had a song, Brenda's Baby, Dear Mama. So he did the gangster thing, but he also did the incredibly, like we would say now, woke, like very, what women's value. You're not
apart from the small matter of the sexual assault.
Yeah, well, we're complicated people, I mean, this is just think about it. The woman that, she admits that I used to go to this nightclub called Nels. The woman that charged him, and I think it was non-consensual later in the hotel room, but she consensually gave him fellatio on the dance floor in public the night before. And then she came to the room, and the accusation was that then several men were there, including beyond Tupac. So the woman was, I guess you'd call a hip hop groupie, but that doesn't. Not
extraordinary back in those times that got as far as it did and got him in jail.
Yeah, well, if you're famous and you do something and the woman goes, I mean, look, there should be zero tolerance, because I mean, we didn't used to think of it this way, but of course a wife can be raped. Not all sex is consensual, even if you're in a relationship with people. But yeah, I mean, Tupac was playing with fire. I think there was a lot of drug use and a lot of drinking. And I think the real guy, somebody who knew him well, said, look at that video of him at 17. He really was that smart, sensitive young man. He wasn't the other guy. He was playing a role. I think he kind of, I could see it being empowering to play a gangster. Like I said, those guys on Top Boy or any other gangster movie. Imagine you were playing an IRA hitman, and then you swaggered around like Colin Farrell would, like swagger around Dublin. Like, it would be silly and nobody would take it seriously, but you could almost start believing
in your own. You could, no doubt. Well, Douglas Century, thank you so much for bringing us into that world and describing what way it was. And it'll be interesting to see what happens to Keffe D.
Yeah, to be continued. Hey, it's
to be continued.
We'll see. Thank you for having me on, Nicola.
Thanks, Doug. You've been listening to Crime World, a podcast from SundayWorld.com, produced by Ian Mullaney and edited by me, Nicola Tallant. Research assistant is Claude Amini. If you like this show and love true crime, leave us a review, or why not download the free SundayWorld.com app for lots more stories from Ireland and across the globe.